I sat in the defendant's chair, watching my stepmother weep while my father stared at the floor. To the judge, I looked like a bitter woman who had attacked a grieving widow, but my family did not know about the small device burning a hole in my pocket. It contained 20 years of secrets. When my lawyer plays that recording, the story they have told for 2 decades will finally shatter. My name is Aubrey Nolan, and I am 35 years old. For the last decade, I have built a reputation as a senior investigator at the Beacon Line Financial Crimes Unit. My job is defined by precision, by the cold, hard lines of forensic accounting, and by the ability to spot a liar through a spreadsheet. I am the person you call when you suspect your business partner is embezzling funds, or when a caretaker is siphoning money from a pensioner. I deal in facts. I deal in evidence. I am usually the one asking the questions, sitting on the right side of the interrogation table, holding the power of the truth in my hands. But this morning, the air in the Westbridge County Court did not smell like justice. It smelled of stale coffee, old wood polish, and the suffocating perfume of the woman sitting in the front row of the gallery. Today, I was not the investigator. I was the defendant. And looking at the faces surrounding me, it was clear that in the court of public opinion, or at least the court of the Nolan family, the verdict had already been delivered long before the gavel banged. I sat stiffly in the hard wooden chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from trembling. It was not fear, exactly. It was a volatile cocktail of humiliation and a burning, acidic rage that I had been swallowing for 25 years. To my right sat my attorney, Jonah Pierce, a man whose calmness was unnerving. He arranged his papers with slow, deliberate movements, seemingly unbothered by the hostility radiating from the benches behind us. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Sterling peered over her spectacles, her expression severe. She was a woman known for her low tolerance for family drama, and looking at the docket, she clearly thought this was a waste of the court's time, or worse, a tragic case of elder abuse. "Ms. Nolan," Judge Sterling said, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room, "I want to be very clear about the gravity of what is happening here. We are not just discussing the validity of the last will and testament of the late Eleanor Nolan. We are discussing serious allegations of coercion, undue influence, and perhaps most disturbingly, domestic violence against a vulnerable family member. The court takes these matters with the utmost seriousness." She paused, her eyes drilling into mine. "I understand you hold a position of significant trust at Beacon Line. It begs the question of whether a person capable of the actions alleged in this complaint can be trusted with such responsibility." Her words felt like a physical blow. My career was the one thing I had built for myself, the one fortress Vanessa had not been able to breach. Now, she was at the gates with a battering ram. I risked a glance over my shoulder. It was a mistake. There she was, Vanessa Nolan, my stepmother. She was dressed in a modest black dress that cost more than my first car, the fabric draping perfectly over her slender frame. She looked fragile, shattered, a masterpiece of grief. Her makeup was minimal, just enough to highlight the dark circles under her eyes, suggesting sleepless nights spent mourning her beloved mother-in-law. But the centerpiece of her ensemble was the beige medical brace wrapped securely around her right wrist. She cradled it against her chest like a wounded bird, wincing slightly whenever she shifted in her seat. Surrounding her was the phalanx of my family, my cousins, aunts, and uncles, people who had known me since I was in diapers, were leaning in toward her, whispering words of comfort, patting her good shoulder. They shot glances at me that ranged from disappointment to open disgust. And then there was my father, Greg. He sat right next to Vanessa, his body angled toward her, protecting her from me. He looked older than his 60 years, his face gray and drawn. I tried to catch his eye, willing him to look at me, to see his daughter, the girl he used to teach how to ride a bike, but he refused. He stared resolutely at the floor, his hand resting on Vanessa's knee. The rejection was total. It was silent, and it was absolute. Even Sarah, my childhood best friend from the church choir, was sitting 2 rows back, shaking her head as she listened to whatever poison my Aunt Paula was whispering in her ear. They all believed it. They believed I was the monster Vanessa said I was. Your Honor, a smooth, oily voice cut through the tension. Caleb Morton rose from the plaintiff's table. He was a shark in a $3,000 suit, a man who made his living contesting inheritances and destroying reputations. He did not look at the judge. He looked at the gallery, playing to his audience. We intend to show that Aubrey Nolan is not the upstanding citizen her resume suggests, Morton began, pacing slowly. We will present evidence that she engaged in a systematic campaign to isolate her grandmother, Eleanor Nolan, in the final, confused year of her life. We will show that she used her professional skills not to protect, but to manipulate an elderly woman into rewriting her will, cutting out her own son and the daughter-in-law who had cared for her for decades. Morton stopped directly in front of Vanessa, lowering his voice to a sympathetic register that made my stomach turn. And, Your Honor, when confronted about these financial irregularities by her stepmother, a woman who has tried only to love her, Ms. Nolan did not respond with explanation. She responded with violence. The injury you see on Mrs. Nolan's wrist is not an accident. It is the result of a physical assault by a woman who realized her scheme was unraveling. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. It was perfect. It was theatrical. It was a lie. I looked at Vanessa again. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders shaking with a sob that I knew, with scientific certainty, was devoid of actual tears. I had seen this performance 1,000 times. I had seen it over spilled juice when I was 9. I had seen it over broken heirlooms when I was 12. I had seen it when I was 19 and tried to tell the police she had thrown me down the stairs. The feeling that washed over me was ancient. It was the suffocating helplessness of being a child in a room full of adults who have already decided you are the problem. It was the shame of having bruises that no one wanted to see because acknowledging them would be too inconvenient. She beats me, and they choose her. The thought echoed in my head, a mantra from my youth. She steals from them, and they choose her. She lies to them, and they choose her. But I was not 9 years old anymore. I was not the scared teenager begging the police officer to believe me while my father apologized for my hysterics. I was a grown woman. I was an investigator. And I had learned that the only way to kill a lie is to starve it of oxygen and then shine a light so bright it burns. Mr. Pierce? Judge Sterling looked at my lawyer. Do you have an opening statement, or are we moving to motions? Jonah stood up. He did not pace. He did not look at the gallery. He buttoned his suit jacket and looked directly at the judge. His voice was calm, lacking the histrionics of his counterpart, but it carried a weight that made the room fall silent. Your Honor, Jonah said, his tone conversational, we do not deny that there is a history of conflict in the Nolan family. In fact, we welcome Mr. Morton's desire to examine that history. We agree that the incident on the night of October 15th needs to be understood. However, we disagree on the context. This was not a sudden explosion of anger from a greedy granddaughter. This is the culmination of a pattern of behavior that has existed for 26 years. Caleb Morton scoffed audibly, rolling his eyes for the benefit of my father. Jonah ignored him. The plaintiff paints a picture of a loving family disrupted by one bad apple. We intend to prove that the disruption was, in fact, a survival mechanism. We intend to prove that the changes to Eleanor Nolan's will were not the result of coercion, but the lucid final act of a woman who finally saw the truth about who was caring for her and who was using her. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then he turned slightly, acknowledging Vanessa for the first time. She froze, her tissue hovering halfway to her nose. Furthermore, Jonah continued, regarding the allegation of assault and the injury to Mrs. Nolan's wrist, we assert that the narrative presented by the plaintiff is a complete fabrication designed to discredit my client and force a settlement. Objection, Morton barked. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said, though she looked intrigued. Get to the point. Mr. Pierce? The point, Your Honor, is that we are prepared to dismantle this story piece by piece, but rather than drag this court through weeks of hearsay and character assassination, We would like to submit a piece of evidence that has recently come to light. We move to admit Exhibit A. Morton frowned. We have gone through discovery. I have seen every document they have. What is this? It is not a document, Jonah said. It is an audio recording. The air left the room. I saw Vanessa's spine stiffen. It was a subtle movement, imperceptible to anyone who did not study human behavior for a living, or anyone who had not spent a lifetime tracking her moods to avoid a beating. Her eyes darted to Caleb, then to Greg. The weeping stopped instantly. A recording? Judge Sterling asked, raising an eyebrow. Of what? Of the night in question, Jonah said. The night Mrs. Nolan claims my client attacked her without provocation, and, Your Honor, it contains context that goes back much further than just that evening. Caleb Morton was on his feet, his face flushing red. This is an ambush. We have not had a chance to authenticate this. This is a trial by surprise. I object to the admission of any surprise recordings. For all we know, this is a doctored tape or a violation of privacy laws. Colorado is a one-party consent state, Jonah replied smoothly. My client was a participant in the conversation. It is perfectly legal. And as for authentication, we have a forensic analysis ready to submit alongside it. The judge held up a hand, silencing Caleb's sputtering. She looked at Jonah, then at me. Her gaze was different now, less dismissive, more calculating. She looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly changed shape. I will not rule on the admissibility of new evidence without reviewing it in chambers first, Judge Sterling said firmly, and I will hear arguments from both sides regarding its provenance. We are going to take a recess, 30 minutes. She banged her gavel, the sound sharp and final. As the room erupted into noise, my family whispering frantically, Caleb shouting at his junior associate, the bailiff moving toward the door, I sat perfectly still. I felt a ghost of a smile touch my lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the grim, cold smile of a soldier who has finally led the enemy into the kill zone. My hand drifted to the pocket of my blazer. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth plastic of the digital recorder. It was small, no larger than a pack of gum, but it was heavy. It contained the weight of my childhood. It contained the sound of my ribs cracking. It contained the vile, hateful things Vanessa hissed when she thought no one was listening. It contained the silence of my father. I had labeled it with a small strip of white tape and my own neat handwriting. Last resort. For 20 years, they had controlled the narrative. They had owned the truth because they were louder, because they were better actors, because people prefer a comfortable lie to an ugly reality. They thought they knew what happened in that house. They thought they knew who I was. I closed my fingers around the recorder. Go ahead, I thought, looking at Vanessa's pale, terrified face. Tell them one more lie, because when I press play, nothing you say will ever matter again. To understand why a 35-year-old woman would wear a wire to her own family home, you cannot look at the woman standing in the courtroom. You have to look at the girl I was. You have to go back to the year I turned 9, the year the silence in our small house in Westbridge became so loud it felt like it was screaming. My mother had died of cancer 6 months prior. The house still smelled like her lavender laundry detergent, but the air was heavy with the gray, suffocating weight of my father's grief. Greg Nolan was a good man then. I think he was just broken, and like many broken things, he was desperate for a glue that would hold him together. That glue arrived in the form of Vanessa. She was younger than my mother had been, with brighter clothes and a laugh that seemed to bounce off the walls a little too hard. Dad introduced her as a friend, then a special friend, and then, with terrifying speed, as the woman who was going to help us be a family again. At first, I wanted to like her. I was a lonely child, starving for maternal affection, and publicly, Vanessa fed that hunger. When we were at the grocery store or church, she would squeeze my hand and call me her brave little soldier. She bought me hair ribbons and polished my shoes. She performed the role of the doting stepmother with the skill of a Broadway actress. But the mask always slipped the moment the front door clicked shut and my father's car pulled out of the driveway. It started with small things. comments that were whispered so low I almost thought I imagined them. I would come downstairs wearing a dress she had bought me, and she would smile thin and tight. "You look a little chunky in that, Aubrey," she would say, not looking up from her magazine. "Maybe we should skip dessert. We do not want you to end up alone, do we?" When I teared up, she would sigh, a long, exasperated sound. "Oh, stop it. You are too sensitive. You are always making everything about you. It is exhausting for your father." The first time I truly understood the danger I was in happened a month after she moved in. We were having dinner, just the three of us. Dad was actually smiling, telling a story about his work at the hardware store. I reached for my glass of grape juice. My elbow clipped the edge, and the purple liquid cascaded across the white tablecloth Vanessa had insisted on using. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. "It is okay, honey," Vanessa said immediately, her voice dripping with syrup. She reached over and patted my hand. "Accidents happen. Do not worry. Greg, I will get it." She ushered me into the kitchen to get paper towels. But the moment we crossed the threshold, away from my father's line of sight, her face changed. It was like watching a light switch flip. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a cold, sneering disgust that made my stomach turn. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into the soft flesh of my bicep hard enough to hurt. She pulled me close, her breath smelling of peppermint and malice. "You clumsy little brat," she hissed. "Do you know how much that tablecloth cost? Your father works himself to the bone to put food on this table, and you just throw it around like it is nothing. Do you want him to have a heart attack from stress? Is that what you want?" I shook my head, mute with shock. "Then clean it up," she whispered, shoving the roll of paper towels into my chest. "And do not say a word. If you upset him, I will make sure you regret it." We walked back into the dining room. Vanessa was smiling again. "She is so helpful. Greg, such a good helper." That night, I tried to tell him. I waited until Vanessa was in the shower. I crept into the living room where Dad was watching the news. I climbed onto the sofa next to him, clutching my stuffed bear. "Daddy," I said softly, "Vanessa is mean to me." He frowned, not looking away from the television. "What? No, she is not. Aubrey, she bought you that doll yesterday." "She grabs my arm," I insisted, "and she says mean things when you are not in the room. She said I'm going to give you a heart attack." Dad sighed and finally looked at me, but his eyes were not filled with outrage on my behalf. They were filled with exhaustion. He looked at me like I was another problem he had to solve, another bill he had to pay. "Aubrey, look," he said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I know you miss your mom. I miss her too. But Vanessa is trying very hard. It is not easy stepping into a family like this. You are just having trouble adjusting. You are projecting your anger onto her." "I am not projecting," I said, though I did not know what the word meant. "She is lying." "Enough," he said, his voice sharpening. "I do not want to hear you talk about her like that. She is doing everything for us. You need to show some gratitude." That was the first brick in the wall that would eventually separate me from him forever. He did not want the truth. He wanted peace, and Vanessa gave him the illusion of peace, whereas I, with my needs and my grief, was just a reminder of the war. Over the next year, Vanessa launched a campaign to conquer the rest of the Nolan clan. She was brilliant at it. She threw lavish Sunday dinners for Aunt Paula and Uncle Darren. She baked complicated pastries for my cousin Lily. She sat in the living room with a glass of wine, listening to Aunt Paula complain about her husband, offering validation and sympathy. She spun a narrative about me that was subtle and insidious. She would sigh dramatically while pouring coffee. "I just do not know what to do with Aubrey," she would say, loud enough for me to hear from the stairs. "I try so hard to love her, but she is just so angry. She refuses to let me in. It breaks my heart. Really. But I will keep trying for Greg's sake." And they ate it up. They looked at her and saw a saint. They looked at me and saw a problem child. The incident with the vase sealed my fate. It was my mother's vase, a delicate blue porcelain thing that sat on the mantelpiece. I was reading a book on the floor, nowhere near it. Vanessa was dusting. I watched her reach up, her cloth catching the edge of the base. It wobbled. She could have caught it. I saw her hand hover, but she didn't. She let it fall. The crash was explosive. "Aubrey!" she screamed, before the shards had even settled. My father came running in from the garage. "What happened? What broke?" Vanessa was on her knees, holding a piece of the blue porcelain, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "I told her not to play ball in the house. Greg, I told her 1,000 times. She just threw it and— Oh, Greg, it was Martha's vase. I am so sorry. I tried to stop her." I sat on the floor, my book in my lap, paralyzed. I hadn't moved. I didn't even have a ball. I stammered. "Dad, I was reading." Greg looked at the shattered remains of his late wife's favorite possession. Then he looked at me. The vein in his forehead was throbbing. "Go to your room," he said. His voice was low and dangerous. "But Dad, she knocked it over," I cried, pointing at Vanessa. "Do not lie to me," he roared, making me flinch. "It is bad enough that you broke it, but to blame Vanessa, after everything she does for you? Get out of my sight. You are grounded for a month." I ran to my room, slamming the door. I buried my face in my pillow and screamed silently. I learned a lesson that day, one that rewrites the neural pathways of a child's brain. The truth does not matter. Facts do not matter. What matters is who tells the story. And in my house, Vanessa held the pen. I learned to be quiet. I learned that defending myself only made the punishment worse. I learned that if I swallowed the insults, if I nodded when they called me ungrateful, if I apologized for things I did not do, the yelling would stop sooner. I internalized the role they assigned me. I became the villain of their story so I could survive in their house. There was only one person who seemed to see through the fog. Grandma Eleanor. My grandmother lived in a large, drafty Victorian house on the hill overlooking Westbridge. She was a woman of sharp angles and sharper wit, and while her body was slowing down, her eyes missed nothing. One Sunday afternoon, while Vanessa was holding court in the kitchen, charming Uncle Darren with her lasagna recipe, I was sitting on the porch steps, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. Eleanor came out and sat beside me. Her joints clicked as she lowered herself, smelling of old paper and rosewater. She watched me for a long moment. Then, she reached out to brush a stray hair from my face. I flinched. It was a violent, instinctive jerk of my head, expecting a pinch or a slap. Eleanor froze. Her hand hovered in the air, then slowly lowered. "Aubrey," she said, her voice unusually serious, "why did you jump like that?" My heart started to race. You just surprised me." "Does she hit you?" Eleanor asked. The question hung in the cool autumn air. I looked at the screen door. I could hear Vanessa laughing inside. I imagined what would happen if I said yes. Vanessa would deny it. Dad would say I was lying again. Aunt Paula would say I was a wicked child trying to break up the marriage. And then, when we got home, the doors would close, and I would pay for it. "No," I said. "Vanessa is really nice. She is great." I forced a smile. It felt like plastic stretching across my face. Eleanor looked at me for a long time. She did not believe me. I could see it in the sad, knowing set of her jaw. But she also knew that without proof, she could do nothing against the united front of my father and his wife. "You can come stay with me whenever you want," Eleanor said quietly. "If it ever gets too loud at your house, or if you just need a place to read, my house is always open to you. Do you understand?" "Yes, Grandma," I whispered. From then on, Eleanor's house became my bunker. I spent every weekend I could there. It was the only place where I did not have to walk on eggshells, the only place where I could breathe without checking the temperature of the room first. But I could not stay there forever. Eventually, I always had to go back. The isolation culminated on my 11th birthday. Vanessa had organized a party, ostensibly for me, but really for the relatives. The house was full. Everyone was drinking punch and eating cake. I was sitting in the corner of the living room, feeling the familiar ache of exclusion despite being the guest of honor. I was watching Vanessa tell a story to my cousins. She was animated, glowing, the center of attention. I must have let my guard down. I must have let the mask slip. I must have looked at her with all the resentment and confusion I was carrying. Vanessa stopped talking mid-sentence. She gasped, dropping her hand to her chest. "Oh my God," she said, her voice trembling. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at her. "What is it?" Aunt Paula asked. "What is wrong, Nessie?" Vanessa pointed a shaking finger at me. "Did you see that? Did you see the way she looked at me?" I blinked, confused. "What?" "She just glared at me with such hatred," Vanessa whimpered, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. "And she mouthed something. I think she called me a bitch." "I didn't." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I didn't say anything. I was just sitting here." "Don't you raise your voice at her," Uncle Darren barked, stepping forward. "I saw it too," Aunt Paula chimed in, though she had been looking at her phone a second before. She looked positively demonic. I have never seen a child look at a parent like that. "Aubrey," my father said, stepping out of the crowd. His face was red with embarrassment. "Apologize to your mother, now." "She is not my mother," I shouted. It was the wrong thing to say. It was the truth, but it was the wrong thing to say. A collective gasp went through the room. Vanessa burst into full, racking sobs, burying her face in Greg's shoulder. "I try so hard," she wailed. "I just want her to love me." "Go to your room," Dad spat at me, pointing to the stairs. "Do not come out until you are ready to be a human being." I walked up the stairs, feeling the eyes of 20 adults boring into my back. They were shaking their heads. They were whispering about how difficult I was, how patient Vanessa was, how sad it was that Greg had to deal with such a bad seed. I sat on the top step, out of sight, and listened to them comfort the woman who was tormenting me. I realized then that reality was not solid. Reality was clay, and Vanessa was a sculptor. She could take a silent look and turn it into a scream. She could take a victim and turn her into a monster. And the most terrifying part was not that she was lying. It was that everyone else was so eager to believe her. They wanted the easy story. They wanted the happy family with the tragic flaw of a difficult child. They did not want the messy, ugly truth that the woman serving them cake was a sociopath. I wiped my eyes. I did not cry. Crying was what she did. Instead, I let a cold, hard stone form in the center of my chest. I would not win this by fighting. I would not win this by shouting. If I wanted to survive, I had to be smarter. I had to wait. I did not know it then, sitting on those stairs as an 11-year-old outcast in my own home, but I had just started my training. I was beginning to observe. I was beginning to document. And one day, I would make sure that the version of the story they were telling downstairs would be burned to the ground. The summer I turned 19 marked the beginning of a new era in the Nolan household. I had just finished my freshman year of college, where I was studying forensic accounting. My coursework was filled with case studies of fraud, embezzlement, and the subtle art of tracing money that people desperately wanted to keep hidden. I was learning that numbers, unlike people, do not have agendas. They do not lie to protect their egos. They simply exist, cold and irrefutable. When I returned home for the break, I brought that new lens with me. I was no longer the scared little girl hiding in her room. I was an observer, quieter but sharper. I noticed things I had missed before. I noticed the way the grocery budget seemed to inflate despite the fridge being half empty. I noticed the new designer handbags Vanessa claimed were knockoffs, but smelled of genuine Italian leather. And then, I noticed the empty velvet box on top of the dresser in the master bedroom. It had belonged to Grandma Eleanor, a vintage sapphire brooch she had given to my father to keep safe because the clasp was loose. It was meant to be fixed. It was meant to be an heirloom. I did not accuse Vanessa immediately. I waited until Tuesday morning when my father was at work. I walked into the kitchen where she was drinking her third cup of coffee, scrolling through her phone. "Where is Grandma's brooch?" I asked. My voice was steady, Factual. Vanessa did not look up. I took it to the jeweler's, like your father asked. I called the jeweler, I said. Mr. Henderson said he has not seen you in 6 months. Vanessa froze. She set her phone down on the granite counter with a slow, deliberate click. When she turned to look at me, her eyes were void of any warmth. There was no pretense of the loving stepmother anymore. We were 2 adults now, and she knew I could see her. You are snooping, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You come back into my house, eat my food, and you spy on me? I am not spying. I am asking why you sold a piece of family history. Did you pawn it, Vanessa? Or did you sell it online? Because I saw a deposit in the joint account ledger that matches the market value of a mid-century sapphire piece. I expected her to lie. I expected her to cry. I did not expect her to move with such terrifying speed. She crossed the kitchen in 2 strides. Before I could step back, she shoved me. It was not a playful push. It was a violent, full-body collision that sent me stumbling backward. My lower back slammed into the edge of the butcher block island. The pain was sharp and immediate, knocking the wind out of me. You have no right, she hissed, her face inches from mine. Spittle flew from her lips. You ungrateful little leech. I keep this house running. I take care of your father while you are off playing detective. You stole it, I gasped, clutching the counter for support. She slapped me. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned as if she had pressed a hot iron against it. I stood there, stunned, my hand rising to touch the stinging skin. It was the first time she had hit me since I was a child, but the force behind it was fully adult. It was an assault. You do not speak to me like that, she breathed, her chest heaving. And then, the garage door opened. The hum of the automatic opener was the cue for Act 2. Vanessa's face transformed instantly. The rage evaporated, replaced by a mask of sheer panic. She grabbed her own left wrist with her right hand and dug her fingernails into the skin, dragging them down hard enough to leave angry red welts. What are you doing? I whispered, horrified. My father walked into the kitchen, humming a tune. He stopped dead when he saw us. Vanessa? He asked. Aubrey? Vanessa let out a choked sob and stumbled toward him, cradling her wrist. Oh, Greg, thank God you are home. What happened? Greg looked from her to me. He saw the red mark on my cheek, but he also saw his wife trembling, clutching her arm. I asked her about the cleaning, Vanessa wailed, burying her face in his shirt. I just asked her to help out a little more, and she just snapped. Greg, she came at me, look what she did. Look. She held out her wrist. The scratch marks were fresh, the skin rising in red lines. I didn't touch her, I shouted, the injustice of it burning hotter than my cheek. Dad, she hit me. Look at my face. She sold Grandma's brooch, and when I asked her about it, she attacked me. Greg looked at the red handprint fading on my face. Then he looked at his wife, small and shaking in his arms. He looked at the scratches on her wrist. The calculation in his eyes was heartbreaking. To believe me, he would have to believe his wife was a monster who inflicted pain on herself to frame his daughter. To believe her, he only had to believe that I was the same difficult emotional burden I had been for 10 years. He chose the path of least resistance. Aubrey, he said, his voice cold as ice. Go to your room, now. But Dad... Now, he roared. I fled. I sat on my bed, shaking, listening to the murmur of voices downstairs. I expected him to come up and ask for my side. I expected him to care. Instead, an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Aunt Paula. We are coming over. We need to talk. Vanessa had summoned the cavalry. She had sent a group text, likely detailing my violent outburst. By 6 o'clock, the living room was full. Aunt Paula, Uncle Darren, my cousin Lily. They sat in a circle like a jury. Vanessa sat in the middle, an ice pack on her wrist, looking for all the world like a war survivor. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my eyes red and swollen. I tried to speak. I tried to explain about the brooch, about the slap, about the lies. She is lying, I said, my voice cracking. She hit me first. She scratched herself. Aunt Paula stood up and walked over to me. She took my arm and pulled me into the hallway, away from the others. Her grip was tight. "Stop it," Paula hissed. "Just stop it, Aubrey." "Why won't you listen to me?" I pleaded. "Look at my face, Aunt Paula." "I see it," she said dismissively, "and I am sure things got heated. But look at your father. Look at him." Through the archway, I could see Greg sitting with his head in his hands, looking gray and defeated. "You are destroying him," Paula said, her voice dripping with guilt. "Accusing Vanessa of abuse? Do you know how ugly that is? Do you know what people will say? If you keep this up, you are going to give him a stroke. Is that what you want? Do you want to be the reason your father dies of stress?" The manipulation was masterful. It bypassed logic and went straight for the heart. "I just want the truth," I whispered. "We want peace," Paula corrected. "Go in there. Apologize. Say you were stressed from school. Keep the peace. Aubrey, for your father." I looked at my father, a man who had not defended me once in a decade. I looked at Vanessa, smirking behind her ice pack, and I broke. I walked into the living room and apologized for something I did not do. I swallowed the bile in my throat and said the words they wanted to hear. I validated their reality, and in doing so, I taught them that they could get away with anything. The years that followed were a blur of escalated violence and refined gaslighting. As I moved through my early 20s, the dynamic shifted. I was not there as often, which meant Vanessa had to work faster and harder whenever I visited. There was the Thanksgiving when I was 21. I was carrying a tray of crystal glasses into the dining room. Vanessa waited until I was passing the hallway closet. She threw her hip into the door, slamming it shut just as I passed. The heavy wood caught my elbow, sending the tray crashing to the floor and nearly crushing my fingers in the jam. "Oh my goodness!" she shrieked, hands flying to her mouth. "I didn't see you. Why were you walking so close to the door?" My elbow was throbbing, already swelling to the size of a grapefruit. My father sighed, looking at the shattered crystal. "Aubrey, you have to be more careful. Those were wedding gifts." There was the Christmas when I was 23. We were arguing at the top of the stairs, or rather, she was berating me for not buying a customized gift for Uncle Darren. I turned to walk away. I felt two hands plant firmly in the center of my back. She shoved. I tumbled down the first 4 steps. I managed to grab the banister, wrenching my shoulder, but my hip slammed hard against the edge of a step. The pain was blinding. I lay there on the carpet, gasping for air. "She fell!" Vanessa yelled down to the kitchen. "Greg, come quick. Aubrey slipped on the carpet. I told her those socks were slippery." I looked up at her from the floor. She was standing at the top of the stairs, her face impassive, daring me to speak. I limped for 3 weeks. I told everyone I had tripped while jogging. Then there was the coffee mug incident. I was 24. We were in the sunroom. I had told her I could not lend her $2,000 for a business investment she refused to explain. She picked up a heavy ceramic mug and hurled it across the room. It struck my shoulder with a dull thud before shattering against the wall. "Oops," she said, deadpan. "It slipped. My hands are just so dry in the winter." Every time. I thought about calling the police. I would pick up my phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. But then the movie would play in my head. The sirens, the neighbors watching, Vanessa sobbing, pointing at me, telling the officers I was unstable, that I had attacked her. My father standing there, nodding, backing her up. I knew that without proof. It was just the word of a hysterical daughter against the pillar of the community. The one time the police actually came, it was not my doing. I was 25, visiting for the weekend. The argument started over something trivial, a misplaced bill, but Vanessa was in a mood, fueled by wine and whatever resentment she nursed against me. She started screaming. She threw a vase. She slapped me, scratching my neck. I yelled back, loud, screaming for her to stop. The neighbors, the Millers, heard the commotion and dialed 911. When the squad car pulled up, blue lights flashing through the front window, panic seized me. But Vanessa? Vanessa was in her element. By the time the officers knocked, she was already on the porch. She had messed up her hair. She was crying soft, pitiful tears. I stood in the hallway, pressing a tissue to the scratch on my neck, listening. "I am so sorry you had to come out." "Officers," Vanessa was saying, her voice trembling. "It is my stepdaughter. She has these episodes. She gets so angry. I tried to calm her down, but she just started throwing things." "Is anyone injured, ma'am?" the officer asked. "I am fine," Vanessa sniffed. I do not want her to get in trouble. She has been under so much pressure at work." The officer walked inside. He looked at me. I was disheveled, holding a bloody tissue, shaking with adrenaline. To him, I looked guilty. I looked like the aggressor. "Ma'am, step outside, please," he said to me, his hand resting near his belt. I looked at my father. He was standing in the kitchen doorway. "Dad?" I whispered. "Tell them." Greg looked at the officers. He looked at the neighbors peering through their blinds. He looked at the reputation he had built in this town for 40 years. "It is a family matter, officer," Greg said, stepping forward. "My daughter. She got a little heated. We do not want to press charges. We just want to handle this internally." "Dad!" I choked out. "She hit me." "Enough, Aubrey," he snapped, looking at me with pure exhaustion. "Stop making a scene." The police left with a warning to keep it down. They wrote in their notebooks. I saw the look they exchanged, the look that said, "Another domestic disturbance, unstable kid." They left me there. They left me in the house with her. That night, I packed my bag. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely zip the duffel. I went into the bathroom attached to my old bedroom and locked the door. I turned on the harsh vanity lights and lifted my shirt. There was a fresh, blooming bruise on my ribs, where she had jabbed me with the handle of a broom earlier in the melee. There was the scratch on my neck. There was the ghost of the slap on my cheek from years ago. I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not see the child who wanted to be loved anymore. I did not see the teenager who wanted to be believed. I saw a woman who was alone. "She beats me," I whispered to my reflection. The words felt strange in my mouth, heavy and real. "She beats me, and they choose her." I said it again, louder. "They choose her." It was not a question anymore. It was a fact. It was a data point. My father, my aunts, my uncles, they had made their choice. They preferred the comfortable lie of Vanessa the martyr to the uncomfortable truth of Aubrey the victim. They would sacrifice my safety to protect their delusion. I zipped my jacket. I picked up my bag. I walked out the back door without saying goodbye. I drove back to my apartment in the city, the silence of the car wrapping around me like a shield. I made a vow that night, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I would not go back, not for holidays, not for birthdays. I would not step foot in that house again unless I had a way to ensure that the next time the police came, they would not be taking her word for it. I would not return without insurance. I would not return without a plan. It would take me 10 years to build that plan, but as I drove away from the house that had been my prison, I knew one thing for certain. The next time we met, I would not be the one crying. By the time I reached my late 20s, I had stopped being the victim who hid in her bedroom. I had become something far more dangerous to a person like Vanessa. I had become a senior investigator at the Beacon Line Financial Crimes Unit. My career was not a happy accident. It was a direct response to my upbringing. I had spent my entire childhood trying to decipher the truth in a house built on quicksand, trying to understand how a person could smile while twisting a knife. That specific trauma response, hypervigilance, pattern recognition, and obsession with documentation made me exceptional at my job. At Beacon Line, I spent my days hunting predators. I specialized in elder fraud and familial embezzlement. My targets were rarely strangers in ski masks. They were almost always the charming nephew, the devoted neighbor, or the saintly stepdaughter who had taken over the checkbook just to help out. I sat across interrogation tables from men and women who could cry on cue, who could spin elaborate stories of victimhood, and who relied on the fact that no one wants to believe a family member would steal from their own blood. I saw Vanessa in every single one of them. And because I saw her in them, I began to see her clearly at home. The fear that had paralyzed me as a child had calcified into a cold, professional curiosity. I stopped reacting to her bait. Instead, I started building a case file. I treated my visits to my father's house not as familial obligations, but as undercover operations. I bought a small, leather-bound notebook that never left my person. I called it the Shadow Log. In it, I recorded everything with the dry precision of a police report. August 12th, 2:15 in the afternoon. Subject, Vanessa, made a derogatory comment about my weight in front of Aunt Paula. When I did not react, she escalated, accidentally spilling hot coffee near my hand. No contact made. Subject claimed slippery mug. Note, mug was dry. Handle has textured grip. September 4th, 6:30 in the evening. Subject intercepted mail addressed to Grandma Eleanor. When asked, claimed it was junk mail. Later recovered bank statement from recycling bin. Envelope had been opened. I began to digitize my defense. I created an encrypted folder on my laptop, hidden behind layers of biometric security. Every time I left that house with a new bruise, a pinch on the arm that looked like an accident, a shin banged against a coffee table she had moved 3 inches to the left, I photographed it next to a newspaper for date verification. I uploaded the photos to the cloud. I stopped deleting her voicemails when she would call me late at night, drunk on wine and rage, leaving messages that hissed with venom about how I was an ungrateful brat who was ruining Greg's life. I saved them. Then, I would screenshot the texts she sent the next morning, cheerful, emoji-filled messages asking if I wanted to come over for brunch. The contrast was jarring. It was the visual proof of her dual existence, the monster and the martyr. But the real turning point came with Grandma Eleanor. Eleanor was fading. Her body, once so sturdy and capable of hiking the Colorado trails, was now confined to a hospital bed set up in the living room of her Victorian home on the hill. Her lungs were failing, and her mobility was gone, but her mind was as sharp as a diamond cutting glass. I visited her every Tuesday and Thursday evening. It was our ritual. I would bring takeout, and we would watch old movies or just talk. But as winter approached, the air in the house changed. It became tense. One Tuesday in November, I arrived to find Eleanor frowning at a stack of papers on her bedside table. "Aubrey," she said, her voice raspy but firm, "I need your eyes. You are good with numbers." I pulled a chair close. "What is it, Grandma?" "The house account," she said. "The one your father and Vanessa manage for me. It is supposed to cover the nurses, the medication, and the utilities. But the balance is dropping too fast. I asked Vanessa about it, and she said it was just inflation. She said everything costs more now." My stomach tightened. This was the scenario I investigated 3 times a week at work. "Do you have the login?" I asked. Eleanor nodded and pointed to a sticky note inside her bedside drawer. I opened my laptop and logged into her bank portal. I did not look at the summary. I went straight to the transaction history. I filtered for outgoing transfers. And there it was, the inflation Vanessa had spoken of. It was not one big lump sum. Amateurs steal big. Professionals steal small. It was a series of microtransactions. $200 here for supplies. $300 there for transportation. $500 to a generic LLC that, with 2 minutes of searching on the Secretary of State website, I traced back to a P.O. box registered in Vanessa's maiden name. Then there were the jewelry store charges, the spa visits disguised as therapy. I felt a wave of nausea. It was classic siphoning. She was bleeding Eleanor dry, sip by sip, banking on the fact that an old, dying woman would be too tired to check the math. I looked at Eleanor. She was watching my face, reading the data in my expression. "Tell me," she said. "Do not protect me, Aubrey. I am old, not fragile." I took a deep breath. This was the moment. If I told her, I was declaring war. I was breaking the unspoken rule of the Nolan family. Pretend everything is fine. But I looked at the woman who had been my only sanctuary when I was a terrified child. I owed her the truth. I turned the laptop so she could see the screen. It is not inflation, Grandma, I said softly. Look here, on the 3rd of this month, $500 to VM Consulting, that is Vanessa. Look here, $400 at a boutique in Denver, that is not for your medication. I walked her through the lines. I showed her the pattern. I showed her that in the last 6 months alone, nearly $15,000 had vanished into Vanessa's pockets, while my father likely signed the checks without looking, trusting his wife implicitly. Eleanor did not cry. She did not scream. She simply closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, they were dry and filled with a profound, heartbreaking disappointment. She thinks I am stupid, Eleanor whispered. She thinks because my legs do not work. My brain has stopped too. She thinks she can get away with it, I said. Because Dad lets her. Eleanor reached out and took my hand. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was surprisingly strong. Thank you, Aubrey. Everyone else treats me like a child or a burden. You are the only one in this family who does not run away from the truth. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception, but this time, I was watching the performance from the front row. Vanessa must have sensed that the walls were closing in, or perhaps she just needed to secure her position as the beloved caretaker before the end came. She ramped up her social media presence. She posted selfies sitting by Eleanor's bed, looking exhausted and noble, with captions like, "So hard to see our matriarch fading, but I am honored to care for her until the end. Family is everything." The comments were flooded with praise from church friends and neighbors, calling her a saint, an angel, a warrior. I would read these comments in the parking lot before going inside, feeling the bile rise in my throat. One evening, I arrived a little earlier than usual. The front door was unlocked. I walked in softly, my investigator instincts on high alert. I heard voices coming from the kitchen. It was Vanessa. She was on the phone, her voice low and agitated. I stopped in the hallway, pressing myself against the wall, pulling out my phone to hit record on the voice memo app. It was second nature by now. "I do not know how much longer, Caleb," Vanessa was saying. "She is hanging on. It is ridiculous. The doctors said weeks, but she is just lingering." A pause. She was listening to someone on the other end. "I am trying," she snapped. "I put the papers in front of her yesterday, but she said she wanted to read them again. Stubborn old woman. She refuses to sign anything that is useful. I am exhausted. I have been wiping her chin for 6 months. I deserve that signature." My heart hammered against my ribs. Stubborn old woman. That was what she called the woman she praised as a queen on Facebook. "Yeah, well, Greg is useless," Vanessa continued. "He just sits there and holds her hand and cries. He won't push her. I have to do everything. Look, just get the other draft ready. If she dies before signing the amendment, we are going to have a problem with Aubrey. The little bitch is sniffing around." She hung up. I stopped the recording and saved it to the encrypted folder. Evidence. I walked back out the front door, waited 30 seconds, and then opened it again, slamming it loudly. "Hello?" I called out cheerfully. "I brought dinner." Vanessa appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, a bright, fake smile plastered on her face. "Aubrey, you are early. How lovely to see you." "I missed Grandma," I said, looking her dead in the eyes. I wanted to spend as much time as possible with her, while she is still lingering. Vanessa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of unease crossing her face, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, go on in. She has been asking for you." I went into the living room. Eleanor was awake, staring at the ceiling. When she saw me, her expression softened. "Close the door," she said. I pushed the heavy oak door shut until it clicked. "Did you hear her?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Hear who?" "Vanessa. In the kitchen. She talks louder than she thinks." I nodded. "I heard." Eleanor sighed. a sound that seemed to rattle deep in her chest. I have made a decision. Aubrey, I am not going to let her win. I worked my whole life for what I have. Your grandfather and I built this. I will not let it pay for her handbags and her vanity. What do you want to do? I asked. I need you to make an appointment, Eleanor said. Not with the family lawyer. Vanessa knows him. He plays golf with Caleb Morton. I need someone new. Someone she cannot charm and someone she cannot bully. I know a few people, I said. Through work, good people, ironclad. Good, Eleanor said. Call them tomorrow. And Aubrey, you will have to take me. It has to be secret. If Vanessa knows I am changing the will, she will. I do not know what she will do, but I do not want to find out while I am helpless in this bed. I will get you there, I promised. I will take a personal day. We will say we are going for a drive to see the fall colors. She won't suspect a thing if we play it right. Eleanor looked at me, her eyes wet. I am sorry. Aubrey, I am sorry I did not see it sooner. I am sorry I let you be the one to carry all this darkness for so long. It is okay, Grandma, I said, squeezing her hand. We are fixing it now. Yes, she said, her voice hardening with a resolve I had not heard in years. We are fixing it. She thinks she has already won. She thinks she can write the ending of this story. Eleanor squeezed my hand back. She is about to learn that the pen is in my hand, she whispered, and I am leaving everything to the one person she could not break. We sat there in the dim light, conspirators in the heart of the enemy camp. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to Vanessa's abuse. I wasn't just surviving it. I was about to help strike the blow that would bring her house of cards crashing down. Make the call, Eleanor said, closing her eyes. And then, let us see how she likes it when the stubborn old woman finally makes a move. The office of Jameson and Clark was quiet, a stark contrast to the noise that usually filled my life. The only sound was the scratching of a fountain pen against thick, cream-colored paper. I watched Grandma Eleanor's hand. It was shaking slightly, a tremor of age and illness, but her grip on the pen was ironclad. She did not hesitate. She signed her name, Eleanor Marie Nolan, with a flourish that felt like a final act of rebellion. It is done, she said, setting the pen down. Mr. Jameson, a man with gray hair and eyes that had seen every variation of family greed, nodded respectfully. We have the distribution as discussed, 70% of the liquid assets, the investment portfolio, and the deed to the property at 42 Oak Street go to your granddaughter, Aubrey Nolan. 20% goes to the St. Jude Home for Children. And regarding your son, Gregory, and his wife, Vanessa. He paused, looking over his glasses. $5,000 each, Eleanor said firmly, explicitly stated, so they cannot claim I forgot them. And the reason for this distribution? Mr. Jameson asked, his voice steady. For the record. Because my son has forgotten who raised him, Eleanor said, her voice clear and cutting. And because his wife sees me as an ATM machine with a pulse, Aubrey is the only one who sees me as a person. Mr. Jameson nodded and signaled to his paralegal. We are going to record the video statement now. Mrs. Nolan, just to be safe, we want to establish capacity beyond a shadow of a doubt. A small camera was set up on a tripod. The red light blinked on. Eleanor sat up straighter in her wheelchair. She looked directly into the lens, and for a moment, 10 years seemed to melt off her face. She spoke clearly, stating the date, her full name, and her intent. She looked into the camera and said, I am making these decisions of my own free will. I am not under duress. I am not confused. I am simply awake. For the first time in a long time, I am awake. When we left the office, the autumn air felt crisp. I pushed her wheelchair to my car, feeling a strange mixture of relief and terror. We had just pulled the pin on a grenade. Now, we just had to wait for the explosion. When we got back to the house, Vanessa was waiting. She was standing on the porch, arms crossed, tapping her foot. She looked like a predator sensing a shift in the wind. "Where have you two been?" she asked, her voice pitched high with fake concern. "I was worried sick. You have been gone for 3 hours. Aubrey, she needs her rest." "We went for a drive," I said, loading the wheelchair into the trunk. "To see the leaves change. Grandma wanted some fresh air." Vanessa narrowed her eyes. She looked at Eleanor, searching her face for a sign of weakness or confusion, but Eleanor just smiled. It was a small, enigmatic smile, the kind the Mona Lisa wears when she knows a secret that would burn cities to the ground. "It was a lovely drive, Vanessa," Eleanor said sweetly. "You should try getting some fresh air yourself. It might clear your head." Vanessa stiffened. She knew something had happened. I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes, calculating, paranoid. She spent the rest of the evening hovering, asking probing questions about where we stopped, who we saw, if we bought anything, but we gave her nothing. For once, the silence in the house was not oppressive. It was pregnant with justice. Eleanor passed away 11 months later. She died in her sleep, quietly, without pain. I like to think she let go because she knew her work was done. She had secured the fort. She had protected the legacy. The funeral was a spectacle of hypocrisy. It was held at the First Baptist Church, and the pews were packed. Vanessa had orchestrated the entire event, of course. She sat in the front row, dressed in black lace, weeping into a handkerchief that never seemed to get wet. She accepted condolences with the grace of a tragic heroine, holding onto my father's arm as if she were the one who had lost a mother. "She was my rock," I heard her tell the pastor. "I do not know how I will go on without her wisdom." I sat 3 rows back, alone. I did not cry. My grief was a private, hollow thing, a stone in my gut that made it hard to breathe. I watched my father, who looked truly devastated, but also lost, like a ship that had cut its anchor. He was adrift, and Vanessa was the only shoreline he could see. The relatives ignored me. Aunt Paula gave me a curt nod. Uncle Darren looked through me, to them. I was the estranged daughter who had barely visited. They did not know about my secret Tuesday nights, and who was probably there just to see if she got a check. They had no idea. The reading of the will took place 2 weeks later. It was in the conference room of Mr. Jameson's firm. The mahogany table was long and polished. My father sat on one side, flanked by Vanessa and Aunt Paula. I sat on the other side, alone. Vanessa was already planning. I could hear her whispering to Greg before the lawyer walked in. "We should probably sell the big house," she murmured. "The market is up. We can use the money to upgrade our place. Maybe take that trip to Italy we talked about. Mom would want us to enjoy it." "Mr. Jameson entered the room. He carried a leather folder. He did not smile. He sat at the head of the table and opened the file. "I will skip the preamble," he said, his voice dry. "I am the executor of the estate of Eleanor Marie Nolan. The last will and testament was updated and notarized on October 14th of last year." Vanessa frowned. "Updated? I did not know she updated it." "She did." "Mr. Jameson said. He began to read. When he got to the part about the house, the Victorian estate on the hill, valued at over $1.5 million, going to me, the room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit. "To my granddaughter, Aubrey," Jameson read, "I leave the property at 42 Oak Street, along with 70% of my residual estate." "What?" Vanessa's voice cracked. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "And to my son, Gregory," Jameson continued, not looking up. "I leave the sum of $5,000. To his wife, Vanessa, I leave the sum of $5,000. "That is a mistake," Vanessa said. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is a typo. Read it again." "It is not a mistake, Mrs. Nolan," Jameson said calmly. "It is quite specific." "She was senile!" Vanessa screamed. The mask was gone. The grieving daughter-in-law had vanished, replaced by the woman who had shoved me down the stairs. She did not know what she was doing. She was confused. Aubrey made her do this. She whirled on me, her eyes wild. You did this. You poisoned her. You spent all those Tuesdays whispering lies in her ear, turning her against us." "I did not whisper anything," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "I just listened to her. Something you never did." "You little snake!" Vanessa lunged toward the table, but Uncle Darren held her back. "You manipulated a dying woman. That is elder abuse. That is fraud." My father looked at me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, I hoped he would see the truth. I hoped he would realize that his mother had seen Vanessa for who she was. But he didn't. He looked at me with a mix of horror and betrayal that broke the last tether between us. "How could you?" Greg whispered. "Aubrey, how could you force her to do this? She loved me. She would never cut me out. You must have terrified her." "I did not force her, Dad," I said. "She saw the bank statements. She saw the money Vanessa was siphoning."
"Liar!" Vanessa shrieked. "He is lying. Greg, do not listen to her. She is trying to destroy us."
"We will contest this," Greg said, his voice shaking with rage. "We will not let you steal my mother's legacy. You are sick, Aubrey. You need help."
"Get out," Vanessa hissed. "Get out of this room before I kill you."
I stood up. I picked up my copy of the will. I looked at the family that had rejected me, the father who had abandoned me, and the woman who had abused me. "I will see you in court," I said. I walked out, but I knew it wasn't over. I knew Vanessa. I knew she would not let go of $1 million without burning the world down first. I was right. 3 days later, I was at my apartment, drinking tea, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. There was a knock at the door. A process server stood there. He handed me a thick manila envelope. "Aubrey Nolan?" he asked. "You have been served." I closed the door and slid down to the floor. I opened the packet. It was heavy. The first document was expected. A petition to invalidate the will based on undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. They were claiming I had isolated Eleanor, that I had drugged her, that I had coerced her into signing a document she did not understand. But the second document made my blood run cold. It was a civil lawsuit, Vanessa Nolan versus Aubrey Nolan. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, assault and battery. I flipped the page. Attached to the complaint was a photograph. It was a picture of Vanessa's face, the left side swollen and purple, her lips split. It looked brutal. It looked real. The caption read, "Injury sustained on the evening of October 12th, during an altercation at the plaintiff's residence." October 12th. I stared at the date. My mind raced backward. October 12th. That was a Tuesday, 2 weeks before Eleanor signed the will. I scrambled for my laptop. I pulled up my work calendar. I pulled up my timesheets from Beacon Line. On October 12th, I had been in the office until 9 o'clock at night, closing a case on a Ponzi scheme. I had swiped my badge at the secure turnstile at 8:58. I had stopped for gas on the way home at 9:30. I had the credit card receipt. I was not even at their house on October 12th. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa had staged it. She had beaten herself up, or had someone do it, and taken a picture, saving it for a rainy day. She had created an insurance policy. She knew that if Eleanor ever changed the will, she could use this. She could paint me as violent, as dangerous, as the kind of person who would beat a woman to get what she wanted. She was not just trying to get the money back, she was trying to destroy me. She was trying to strip me of my credibility, my career, and my freedom. If I was convicted of assaulting her, or even found liable in civil court, I would lose my investigator license. I would lose my job. I would lose everything. And my father was listed as a witness. Gregory Nolan will testify that he heard the defendant shouting and observed the plaintiff's injuries immediately following the defendant's departure. He was going to lie for her, again, or maybe he believed it. Maybe she had manipulated him so thoroughly that he remembered things that never happened. I looked at the photo of Vanessa's bruised face. It was a masterpiece of deception. And I looked at the picture of my grandmother on my mantelpiece. Vanessa was trying to erase Eleanor's last wish. She was trying to rewrite history so that Eleanor was a senile victim and I was a violent predator. She wanted to wash away the truth with a flood of legal filings and lies. I sat there on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the paperwork of my own destruction. The silence of the room was deafening. I felt small. I felt like the 9-year-old girl hiding in the closet. But then, my hand brushed against my pocket. The hard plastic edge of the recorder was still there. Last resort. I had not played it yet. I had been saving it. I had hoped the will would be enough. I had hoped they would accept Eleanor's decision and leave me alone. But they had chosen war. I picked up the legal complaint and looked at Vanessa's name one more time. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to talk about violence? You want to talk about October 12th? I pulled the recorder out.
Let's talk about the night you forgot I was recording.
I did not know if the recording would be enough to stop a civil suit. I did not know if a judge would even let me play it. But I knew one thing. I was done running. I was done hiding. I stood up, I walked to my desk, and opened my evidence file. I placed the lawsuit next to the timesheets. I placed the photo of Vanessa's fake bruise next to the photos of my real ones. I was not just a victim anymore. I was the lead investigator on the most important case of my life, and I was going to bury them. If Vanessa was a master of the private insult, she was a virtuoso of the public narrative. She did not wait for the court date to begin her defense. She took the battle to the one place where evidentiary rules did not apply and where tears counted as facts, the court of public opinion.
3 days after I was served with the lawsuit, my phone began to buzz with a relentless, vibrating fury. I opened a link sent to me by a concerned acquaintance. It was a segment from the local Channel 8 evening news. The headline read, "Heartbreak in Westbridge. A grieving widow's fight for justice." I clicked play, my hand trembling slightly. There sat Vanessa, in our living room. No, her living room now. She was wearing a soft pastel cardigan that made her look smaller, softer. Her arm was in a sling, a prop I knew she had bought at a pharmacy, as no doctor had prescribed it. The lighting was warm, casting a halo around her tear-stained face. "I do not care about the money," Vanessa said to the reporter, her voice breaking perfectly on the last syllable. "I really do not. I just care about Eleanor's legacy, and I care about Aubrey. I raised her like my own. To lose my mother-in-law, and then to lose my daughter to this anger. It feels like I'm attending 2 funerals at once." The reporter nodded sympathetically. "And you allege that Ms. Nolan became violent when you tried to discuss her grandmother's care?" Vanessa looked down, wiping a non-existent tear. "I promised Greg I would not talk about the bad times. I just want her to get help. I just want my family back." It was a masterpiece. In 2 minutes, she had erased 20 years of abuse and replaced it with a story of a saintly stepmother victimized by a greedy, unstable stepdaughter. The fallout was immediate and nuclear. The comments section was a sewer of judgment. People I had known my entire life. Women who had taught me Sunday school. Neighbors who had waved to me while mowing their lawns were tearing me apart. I always knew there was something off about that girl. One comment read, "So cold. Vanessa is a saint for putting up with her." Imagine suing your own father after he raised you alone. Another wrote, "Ungrateful. Money really reveals character." I heard she hit her stepmom. Elder abuse is real. Folks, I scrolled until my eyes blurred. They believed her. Of course they believed her. She gave them the story that made them feel good about themselves. The story where the community supports the grieving widow. I was the disruption. I was the villain who complicated the narrative. But the social isolation was just the first wave. The second wave hit my career. On Friday morning, I was called into the director's office at Beacon Line. I walked in, expecting a briefing on the Ponzi scheme case. Instead, I found the director of human resources sitting next to my boss, a thick file on the desk between them. "Sit down, Aubrey," my boss said. He did not look me in the eye. "What is going on?" I asked, though a cold stone was already forming in my stomach. We received a formal complaint filed with the Ethics Board this morning, the HR director said. It is anonymous, but it contains specific allegations regarding your conduct. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. Complaint against investigator Aubrey Nolan. Subject demonstrates a pattern of emotional volatility and uncontrolled outbursts unsuitable for law enforcement. Furthermore, it is alleged that subject has utilized Beacon Line proprietary database software to illegally surveil family members and personal acquaintances. I felt the blood drain from my face. This is a lie. I have never used the database for personal reasons. You can check my audit logs. We will, my boss said, his voice heavy. But the allegation is serious, Aubrey, and given the high profile of the civil suit filed against you, the one involving assault. He let the sentence hang there. They knew. Vanessa or her lawyer had made sure my employer knew about the lawsuit. I am being framed, I said, my voice rising. My stepmother is trying to discredit me because I uncovered her embezzlement. That is a personal matter, the HR director cut in. Until the internal investigation is complete, we have to place you on administrative leave. Without pay, you will need to surrender your badge, your weapon, and your laptop. I stared at them. 10 years. I had given this unit 10 years of my life. I had closed more cases than anyone in the department, and it took one letter from Vanessa to strip me naked. I placed my badge on the desk. It made a hollow clack against the wood. I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box of my belongings, passing security guards who used to share coffee with me. They looked away. I drove home to an apartment that felt suddenly like a bunker. I needed to talk to someone. I needed Mark. Mark and I had been together for 3 years. He was an accountant, safe, steady, conflict avoidant. I thought he was my partner. When he came over that night, he did not hug me. He stood in the entryway, shifting his weight from foot to foot. My mom saw the news report, he said quietly. It is a lie, Mark, I said, desperate for him to understand. You know Vanessa. You know what she is like. I know what you have told me, he said. But Aubrey, assault, the police report, and now you are suspended? It is a coordinated attack, I cried. Can't you see that? She is cornering me. Mark took a step back. I can't do this. Aubrey, the drama. It is too much. My firm is conservative. I can't be dragged into a public family war. It is too messy. Messy? I laughed. A sharp, jagged sound. My life is being destroyed, and you are worried about it being messy? I think we should take a break, he said, reaching for the doorknob. Just until things settle down, until you sort this out. If you walk out that door, I said, my voice shaking, do not come back when I win. He walked out. I locked the door and slid down against it, burying my face in my knees. The silence in the apartment was deafening. I had lost my reputation. I had lost my job. I had lost my partner. Vanessa had stripped me of every shield I had built since I was 9 years old. I lay there for a long time, letting the darkness wash over me. I thought about giving up. I thought about calling Caleb Morton and asking what it would cost to make it stop. I could sign over the inheritance. I could apologize. I could disappear. But then my phone buzzed. It was not a hate message. It was a text from Maya Ortiz, the only investigator at Beacon Line who was better than me. I checked the logs before they locked me out. Your search history is clean. I printed a copy. I am coming over. I am bringing wine. And then another text from Jonah Pierce. Don't do anything stupid. Meet me at my office at 8 a.m. Saturday. Bring the coffee. The next morning, the War Council gathered in Jonah's small, brick-walled conference room. It was just 4 of us. Jonah, looking tired, but sharp. Maya, wearing a hoodie and looking ready for a fistfight. And Marla Jensen. Marla was a retired judge, a friend of Eleanor's from their bridge club days. She was 70 years old, smoked thin cigarettes, and had a mind like a steel trap. They are squeezing you, Jonah said, pacing the room. This is the classic playbook. Discredit the witness, isolate the target, make the pain of fighting greater than the cost of surrendering. They want you to break. Aubrey, They want you to call them and beg for a settlement." "Vanessa won't settle for money," I said dully. "She wants me destroyed. She wants to be the victim so badly she is willing to burn everything down." "She is projecting," Marla said, her voice raspy. "She knows that if the will stands, she is exposed. The forensic accounting on Eleanor's estate will become public record during probate. She has to invalidate the will to hide her theft. To do that, she has to invalidate you." "I have the evidence of the theft," I said. "I have the bank statements." "It is not enough," Jonah said. "Not in a he said, she said emotional storm like this. The jury will see a grieving mother and a suspended cop. We need something visceral. We need to prove the pattern." "How?" I asked. "It happened behind closed doors. It always happens behind closed doors." That night, I went home alone again, but the despair was different now. It was colder. It was clarifying. I sat on my floor and opened a box of Eleanor's things I had taken from the house before Vanessa could trash them. At the bottom, tucked inside an old recipe book, was a sealed envelope. "For Aubrey." I opened it. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. "My dearest girl, if you are reading this, I am gone, and the storm has started. I know my son, and I know the woman he married. They will try to make you feel like you are the crazy one. They have done it your whole life. I watched you swallow your truth for 20 years to keep the peace. I watched you take the blame to save your father's feelings. I am asking you to stop. The family you are trying to protect does not exist. It died the day they decided your pain was less important than their comfort. The only way to escape a lie this big is to walk right through the middle of it. Do not hide. Do not be quiet. Turn on all the lights. Aubrey, let them see the ugliness. It is the only way you will ever be free. Love, Grandma." I read the letter 3 times. I let the words sink into my bones. Turn on all the lights. I stood up. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. I looked at the woman staring back. She looked tired. She looked battered. But she did not look scared anymore. I realized then that I had been fighting with one hand tied behind my back. I had been trying to win a legal battle while Vanessa was fighting a character war. I had been trying to be the good daughter even while suing them. I was done being the good daughter. I picked up the phone and called Jonah. It was 2 a.m. "I am in," I said. "I do not care if they drag my name through the mud. I do not care if I never work in this town again. I want to finish this." "Okay," Jonah said, his voice thick with sleep but alert. "If we are going to do this, we have to take a risk, a big one." "Tell me," I said. "Vanessa is an actress," Jonah said. "She has performed for the neighbors, for the police, for the news cameras. She thrives on an audience because she can control the script. But actors get sloppy when they think the critics aren't watching, when they think they are directing the scene. So, Jonah said. We give her one last performance. She wants a confrontation? She wants you to come crawling back? We give it to her. You go to the house. You let her think she has won. You let her think she is squeezing you one last time. She will hurt me, I said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Yes, Jonah said softly. She probably will, and Greg will probably let her. But this time, the audience won't be the neighbors or the church group. The audience will be the jury, I whispered. We wire you, Jonah said. Colorado is a one-party consent state. You go in, you get her to talk, you get her to admit the theft, you get her to show her true face, and if she gets violent, we capture that too. It was a terrifying plan. It meant walking voluntarily into the lion's den. It meant putting my physical safety on the line for a digital file. I looked at Eleanor's letter on the table. Turn on all the lights. Do it, I said. Wire me up. I hung up the phone. I looked out the window at the city lights of Westbridge. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was sleeping soundly, thinking she had buried me. She thought she had taken my voice. She was about to find out that she had only handed me a microphone. The call came at 11:15 at night. My phone buzzed against the nightstand. A harsh, vibrating insect in the dark. I saw the name on the screen. Vanessa. And my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But then a second text arrived. This one from my father. Please, Aubrey, just come over. We can fix this. If you are reasonable and apologize, we can drop the lawsuits. Just come talk to her. She is a mess. I stared at the screen. Reasonable, that was the word they always used. In the Nolan family dictionary, reasonable meant silent. It meant compliant. I did not go alone, not really. I drove to the 24-hour diner on the edge of town where Jonah Pierce and Marla Jensen were waiting in a booth in the back. The neon sign outside buzzed with a dying flicker. Inside, the air smelled of frying grease and stale coffee. Lift your shirt, Marla said. She did not waste time with pleasantries. I pulled up my sweater. Jonah carefully taped the device to my ribcage, right under the line of my sports bra. It was thinner than a credit card, a piece of high-tech surveillance gear I had borrowed from a private contact, not Beacon Line. It has a 6-hour battery life, Jonah said, smoothing the medical tape down. It starts recording the second you press the center. There is no light, no beep, but Aubrey, you have to listen to me. He grabbed my shoulders, looking me dead in the eye. You cannot hit her back. I know, I said. I mean it, Jonah pressed. If she touches you, if she hits you, you curl up and you take it. The moment you throw a punch, it becomes a mutual combat situation. It becomes a family squabble. We need a perpetrator and a victim. We need a clean recording of unprovoked aggression. If you fight back, we lose the high ground. Do you understand? I understand, I said. My stomach churned. I was voluntarily walking into a cage match with a tiger, and I was agreeing to tie my own hands behind my back. And Aubrey? Marla added, lighting a thin cigarette despite the no smoking sign. Get her to talk about the papers. The theft is the trigger. Push the button. I drove to the house that was supposed to be mine, the house that now looked like a fortress of judgment. It was just after midnight when I pulled into the driveway. The porch light was on. I pressed the center of the device against my ribs. I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible vibration. We were live. I walked up the steps and opened the door. The stage was set. It was almost laughable how carefully they had arranged the scene. Vanessa was sitting on the beige sofa, wearing a soft, oversized oatmeal cardigan that made her look tiny and fragile. She held a mug of tea with both hands. Her injured wrist was wrapped in a fresh ace bandage. My father sat in the armchair, looking like a man attending his own execution. But they were not alone. Aunt Paula was leaning against the mantelpiece, arms crossed. My cousin Lily was sitting on the ottoman, looking at her phone but clearly there as a witness. They had convened a tribunal. Aubrey, Vanessa said softly. She did not stand up. Thank you for coming. I know things have been difficult. Difficult is one word for it, I said, staying near the doorway. Slander is another? We just want peace, Greg said, his voice pleading. Vanessa is willing to forgive everything. Aubrey, the assault, the stress. She just wants to be a family again. She wants you to drop this nonsense about the will. It is not nonsense, Dad, I said, keeping my voice level. It is Grandma's wish. It is manipulation, Aunt Paula snapped from the fireplace. You took advantage of a dying woman. Aubrey, everyone knows it. Is that why I am here? I asked, looking at Vanessa. To be told what everyone knows? Vanessa set her tea down. She looked at me with wide, wet eyes. I am here to offer you a grace period. Aubrey, I am willing to tell the judge that I exaggerated the assault charge. I am willing to say it was a misunderstanding. But you have to sign the quitclaim deed. You have to admit the will is invalid. And if I don't? Then I have no choice. Vanessa sighed, a tear tracking perfectly down her cheek. I have the medical reports. I have the photos of my face. I will ruin you. Aubrey, not because I want to, but because you leave me no choice. I took a step closer. I needed the microphone to catch every nuance of her voice. Let us talk about choices. Vanessa, I said, like the choice you made on November 3rd to transfer $5,000 from Grandma's account to a shell company in your maiden name. The room went deadly silent. Vanessa's eye twitched. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, her voice hardening. "Or the choice you made on December 10th, I continued, reciting the data from my mental file. "You forged a check for $1,200 to a consultant that does not exist. I have the handwriting analysis. Vanessa, the loop on the Y matches your signature, not Grandma's." "Stop it," my father said. "Aubrey, stop making things up." "I am not making it up. Dad, I have the bank records. I have the IP addresses. I know about the jewelry you sold online. I know about the credit cards you opened in her name." Vanessa stood up. The cardigan slipped off one shoulder. The fragility was evaporating, replaced by the simmering rage I knew so well. "You have been spying on me," she hissed. "You little creep. You have been digging through my life." "I have been investigating a crime," I said calmly. "Grandma saw it too. That is why she changed the will. She knew you were stealing from her." "She knew nothing!" Vanessa screamed. The volume made Lily jump. "She was a senile old bat who did not know day from night. I took care of her. I wiped her ass. I earned every penny of that money."
Gotcha.
"So you admit you took it?" I asked. "You admit you paid yourself from her accounts?" "I manage this household." Vanessa stepped toward me, her face twisting into a snarl. "I kept this family afloat while you were off playing detective. You think you are so smart? You think you can walk in here with your spreadsheets and judge me?" "I think you altered the power of attorney documents," I said, pushing the final button. "I think you practiced her signature until you got it right. I found the practice sheets in the recycling bin. Vanessa." That was the breaking point. Vanessa let out a primal shriek. She didn't think. She didn't act. She reacted. She lunged at me. She closed the distance between us in a second. Her hands, both of them, the injured one working perfectly fine, slammed into my chest. I stumbled back, catching my heel on the edge of the rug. "You bitch!" she screamed. "You ungrateful, spying little bitch!" She grabbed my hair. The pain was sharp and white-hot. She yanked my head down and drove her knee into my stomach. My instinct, trained by years of law enforcement, screamed at me to immobilize her. I could have dropped her. I knew the hold. I knew exactly how to twist her arm to make her stop. "Do not hit back," Jonah's voice rang in my head. I gritted my teeth and let myself fall. I curled into a ball on the floor, covering my head with my arms, tucking my chin to my chest. "Vanessa, stop!" Greg yelled. But he didn't move. He just sat in his chair, watching. Vanessa kicked me. The toe of her shoe caught me in the ribs, the same ribs where the recorder was taped. I prayed the device didn't shatter. I prayed it was recording the sound of the impact, the wet thud of leather against bone. "How dare you!" she shrieked, landing another kick to my thigh. "I will kill you. I will destroy you." "Don't provoke her. Aubrey," Aunt Paula yelled. "Just apologize. Look what you are making her do." I lay there, absorbing the blows. The physical pain was blinding, but my mind was coldly, terrifyingly detached. I was a human recording device. Thud, a kick to the hip. Thud, a slap to the side of the head. "You think anyone will believe you?" Vanessa panted, leaning over me, grabbing my collar to shake me. Her face was inches from mine, her breath hot and sour. "You are the crazy one. You are the one with the gun and the badge who got suspended. I am the grieving mother. No judge looks at you and sees a victim when I have the bruises." "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice caught by the microphone. She said no one will believe me. "Shut up!" Vanessa slapped me across the face, hard enough to taste blood. "I will tell them you attacked me. I will tell them you broke into the house. I know exactly what to say to the police. I have done it before." "Vanessa, that is enough." Greg finally stood up, but he didn't pull her off. He just put a hand on her shoulder. "She has had enough. Stop." Vanessa straightened up, breathing hard. She smoothed her hair. She looked down at me with pure disgust. "Get out of my house," she spat. I rolled onto my side, gasping for air. My ribs felt like they were on fire.
My lip was swelling. I looked up at my father. "You watched," I wheezed. "You watched her beat me. Again." "You pushed her, Aubrey," Greg said, his voice trembling. "You came in here and you pushed her buttons. Why can't you just leave it alone?" I slowly pulled myself up to a sitting position. My head spun. I checked the tape with a brush of my hand. It was still there. Still warm. "Call 911, I said. "No," Greg said. "We are not calling the police. You are just going to leave." "I am injured," I said. "Call 911, Dad, or I will walk out that door and scream until the neighbors call them." Greg looked at Vanessa. She gave a curt nod. She was already composing herself, fixing her cardigan, putting the injured hand back in the sling. She was getting ready for her close-up. Greg picked up the phone. He dialed 3 numbers. "Yes," he said to the operator. I need an ambulance, and maybe the police. It is my daughter. She lost control. She came over here and started a fight. She is hurt. But, yes, she is calm now. Please hurry." I closed my eyes. She lost control. Even in the face of the carnage he had just witnessed, he could not deviate from the script. He was protecting the predator to the bitter end. When the sirens approached, the familiar red and blue lights washing over the living room walls, Vanessa sat down on the sofa and started to cry. It was a soft, pitiful sound. "I didn't want to hurt her," she sobbed to Aunt Paula. "She just came at me. I had to defend myself." The paramedics came in first. They saw me on the floor, bleeding from the lip, holding my ribs. They saw Vanessa weeping on the couch. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" a medic asked me, kneeling down. I looked at him. I looked at Vanessa. I looked at my father. "I was assaulted," I said clearly. "She attacked me," Vanessa wailed from the sofa. "Officer, she broke in and attacked me." The police officer who had followed the medics in looked between us. He saw the grieving widow and the suspended investigator. I could see the bias forming in his eyes. "We will sort it out," the officer said. "Let's get you checked out." They loaded me onto the gurney. As they wheeled me out of the house, I saw my father close the front door. He didn't look at me. He was already turning back to comfort his wife. The ambulance ride was bumpy. Every pothole sent a jolt of agony through my side. The medic was checking my vitals, asking me if I knew what day it was. "It is Tuesday," I said. "It is the day everything changes." "You took a pretty good beating," the medic said sympathetically. "We are going to give you something for the pain." "No," I said. "No drugs yet. I need to be clear." I reached under my shirt. The tape pulled at my skin as I ripped it free. I held the small black square in my hand. It was warm. The red light was not blinking, but I knew the data was there. I had the sound of her fist hitting my face. I had the sound of her confessing to forgery. I had the sound of her threatening to frame me. I had the sound of my father lying to the 911 operator. For 20 years, it had been my word against theirs. It had been my emotional memory against their collective gaslighting. But now I had gigabytes of objective reality. I lay back against the pillow as the ambulance sped toward the hospital. The pain in my ribs was excruciating, a sharp, stabbing reminder of the price I had paid. But for the first time in my life, the pain didn't feel like shame. It felt like a receipt. I watched the streetlights pass overhead, rhythmic flashes of white against the dark. I closed my fingers around the recorder. Let them tell their story one more time. I thought, let them file their police report. Let them swear on the Bible. I had the truth in my pocket, and it was going to scream louder than Vanessa ever could. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and cold steel. I was lying in a bed with the rails pulled up, staring at the rhythmic rise and fall of the line on the cardiac monitor. My ribs felt like they had been wrapped in barbed wire, and there was a dull, throbbing ache behind my left eye that the doctor called a concussion. My wrist, the one I had used to shield my face, was encased in a temporary splint. But despite the pain, despite the humiliation of being wheeled into the emergency room by colleagues who recognized me, I felt a strange, heavy peace. The door opened. It was not a nurse. It was Jonah Pierce and Maya Ortiz. Maya looked furious. Her jaw was set so tight I thought her teeth might crack. She marched to the side of the bed and looked at my bruised face, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. "You look like hell." "Nolan," she whispered. "You should see the other guy," I tried to joke, but it came out as a wheeze. "Actually, don't. She probably looks perfect. She is good at that." Jonah stood at the foot of the bed. He looked grim, like a general surveying a battlefield that had cost too many lives. "Do you have it?" he asked. I reached toward the bedside table where the plastic bag containing my personal effects had been placed. My fingers fumbled with the knot. Maya stepped in, her hands gentle, and opened it. She pulled out the small, black square. The recorder. It looked so insignificant, just a piece of plastic and circuitry, but we all stared at it as if it were a loaded gun. "Is it safe?" I asked. Maya pulled a laptop from her bag. "It is about to be. I am going to clone this drive to 3 separate encrypted servers before we even leave this room. I am sending a copy to a cloud account only I can access, one to Jonah's secure firm server, and one to a physical drive I will keep in a safety deposit box." She plugged it in. The progress bar on her screen moved agonizingly slowly. When it hit 100%, the 3 of us collectively exhaled. "We need to authenticate it," Jonah said, already shifting into lawyer mode. "I have a forensic audio expert flying in from Chicago tomorrow. He will analyze the waveform to prove there are no cuts, no edits, and no manipulation. He will verify that the voice prints match Vanessa, Greg, and you." "And the medical report?" I asked. Jonah picked up the clipboard hanging at the foot of the bed. "I have already requested a copy for the file. Bruised ribs, sprained wrist, concussion, laceration to the inner lip. The timestamps on the recording match the estimated time of injury perfectly. We have the audio of the impact, and we have the medical proof of the damage. It is a closed loop. Aubrey, she can claim self-defense all she wants, but the audio of you curled up in a ball while she screams threats? That is not self-defense. That is battery." The next morning, Jonah went to war. He did not just file a defense against Vanessa's lawsuit. He filed an amended answer with counterclaims. He sued Vanessa for assault, battery, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He sued my father for negligence and aiding and abetting, and in the exhibits list, simply labeled as Exhibit B, was the notation: audio recording of the incident dated November 14th, taken at the residence of the plaintiff. The reaction was instantaneous. Caleb Morton, the shark who had been so confident when he was parading Vanessa around as a weeping widow, panicked. He filed an emergency motion to suppress the evidence. His filing was a desperate, flailing thing. He argued that the recording was illegally obtained despite Colorado law. He argued it was highly prejudicial and would inflame the jury. He argued that it was an invasion of privacy because it took place in the sanctity of a private home. It was the legal equivalent of throwing furniture in front of a door to stop a battering ram. The hearing was set for 3 days later before Judge Lydia Albright. Judge Albright was a legend in the Westbridge legal community. She was a woman in her 60s who had seen everything from petty theft to capital murder. She was known for being incredibly fair, but she had zero patience for theatrics. The courtroom was empty for the pretrial hearing, save for the legal teams. I sat at the defendant's table, wearing a high-collared shirt to hide the bruising on my neck, my arms still in a brace. Vanessa was there, of course. She looked pale. She refused to look at me. She kept whispering frantically to Caleb, her hands moving and jerky, nervous spasms. "Your Honor," Caleb began, sweating slightly under the fluorescent lights. "This recording is an ambush. It is a violation of my client's most basic rights. Ms. Nolan entered that home under false pretenses, with the express purpose of provoking an altercation to record it. It is entrapment. It is character assassination. If you allow this to be played, the jury will be so prejudiced against Mrs. Nolan that a fair trial regarding the will becomes impossible." Judge Albright leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "Mr. Morton, Is it your position that the recording is fake? No, Your Honor, but is it your position that Colorado is not a one-party consent state? Technically it is, but the context, Jonah interrupted, standing up slowly, is the entire point. Your Honor, Mr. Morton argues that this is just a domestic dispute unrelated to the will. We argue that it is the smoking gun that connects the violence to the fraud. Jonah walked to the podium. He did not shout. He spoke with the quiet intensity of a man holding 4 aces. On this recording, Jonah said, Vanessa Nolan does not just hit my client. She boasts. She explicitly states that she has fixed the paperwork for years. She states that she knows how to manipulate the police. She threatens to frame my client for an assault she is currently committing. This goes to the very heart of the case. Your Honor, the plaintiff claims she is a victim of a greedy stepdaughter. This recording proves she is, in fact, a predator who uses violence to enforce silence and protect her theft. Caleb jumped up. That is speculation. A few angry words in the heat of the moment do not prove fraud. It shows state of mind, Jonah countered. It shows a pattern. It explains why the deceased, Eleanor Nolan, felt she had to change her will in secret. She was living in a house with a woman who beats people when she does not get her way. Judge Albright looked at the 2 lawyers. She looked at me. Then she looked at Vanessa. I am concerned about the prejudicial nature, the judge admitted. It is powerful evidence. Once the jury hears it, they cannot unhear it. If I admit it, I risk a mistrial on appeal if it is deemed too inflammatory. My heart sank. She was going to suppress it. She was going to play it safe. However, Jonah said, pulling a document from his briefcase, we are not relying solely on the tape to establish the pattern. We have a corroborating witness. Caleb frowned. What witness? There was no one else in the house. Not in the house, Jonah said. Next door. He handed a sworn affidavit to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. This is a statement from Mrs. Agnes Gable, Jonah said. She has lived next door to the Nolans for 30 years. She is 82 years old and rarely leaves her porch. I remembered Mrs. Gable. She was the neighborhood watch in human form. Nothing happened on our street without her knowing. Judge Albright put on her reading glasses. Read the relevant portion. Mr. Pierce. Jonah cleared his throat. Mrs. Gable states, I have heard them fighting for years. It was always Vanessa screaming, but last summer, when I was gardening near the fence, I heard Vanessa talking on the phone on her back deck. She was laughing. She said, It is easy, honey. You just cry. The police always believe the mother. I have never been caught because I know how to turn on the waterworks. I never told anyone, because I did not think it was my business, until I saw Aubrey being taken away in an ambulance last week. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Vanessa turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. Her waterworks defense had just been dismantled by an 82-year-old woman with a garden trowel. Caleb Morton slumped in his chair. He knew the narrative was dead. Judge Albright took off her glasses. She looked at Vanessa with a gaze that could have frozen water. The motion to suppress is denied, she ruled. The recording is admissible. However, I am giving a limiting instruction. The jury will be instructed that the recording is to be used to assess the credibility of the witness and to establish a pattern of conduct, not as immediate proof of the specific fraud allegations regarding the will itself, but they will hear it. She banged her gavel. We are adjourned until jury selection on Monday. We walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. I felt lightheaded. We had done it. The truth was going to be heard. Aubrey, wait. It was Caleb Morton. He was hurrying after us, his expensive suit looking a little less sharp than usual. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. She had likely fled out the back exit to avoid the press. Mr. Pierce, Caleb said, nodding to Jonah, but his eyes were on me. Can we have a sidebar, just for a moment? Jonah looked at me. I nodded. What is it, Caleb? Jonah asked. Look, Caleb said, dropping his voice. We can make this go away. All of it. The lawsuit, the counterclaims, the press. Vanessa is willing to be generous.
How generous? Jonah asked, his face a mask of indifference. She will drop the contest against the will, Caleb said. Aubrey keeps the house. She keeps the investments. Vanessa walks away with the $5,000 Eleanor left her. And she will add a cash settlement of $200,000 from her own life insurance policy payout. My breath hitched. He was offering me everything. The house, the money, plus a bonus. And in exchange? Jonah asked. In exchange, Caleb said, we seal the record. The recording is destroyed. Aubrey signs a non-disclosure agreement stating that the assault allegations were a misunderstanding. No press, no book deals, no ruining Vanessa's reputation in the community. She moves to Florida. You stay here. Everyone wins. Jonah looked at me. It is a good offer. Aubrey, you get the inheritance, you get vindication in the bank account, and you never have to see her again. I stood there in the hallway of the courthouse. I thought about the $200,000. It was a lot of money. It could pay off my student loans. It could buy me a new car. It could buy me a fresh start. All I had to do was let her keep her mask. All I had to do was let the world continue to believe she was a decent woman who had just had a bad run of luck. I would know the truth, but no one else would. I touched the brace on my wrist. I thought about the sound of my father's voice on the tape, lying to the operator. I thought about Grandma Eleanor dying in that house, knowing she was being robbed by the woman supposed to care for her. If I took the money, I was selling Eleanor's suffering. If I took the money, I was saying that the truth had a price tag, and mine was $200,000. I looked at Caleb. He looked hopeful. He thought he had me. He thought everyone had a price. No, I said. Caleb blinked. Excuse me? Did you hear the number? 200,000, plus the estate. That is over $2 million in assets. Aubrey. I heard you, I said, and the answer is no. Aubrey, Caleb said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. Think about this. A trial is messy. It is public. Do you really want to drag your father through this? Do you want to destroy the family name? The family name was destroyed the moment my father watched his wife beat his daughter and did nothing. I said, you can keep your money, Mr. Morton, and you can tell Vanessa to save her packing for Florida. She is going to need it for prison. You are making a mistake, Caleb hissed. You are choosing a war when you could have peace. I do not want peace, I said, stepping closer to him so he could see the fire in my eyes. I want justice, and justice is not a private settlement. Justice is a jury of 12 people hearing exactly what kind of monster she is. I turned to Jonah. Let's go. We walked away, leaving Caleb standing alone in the hallway. My ribs still ached. My head still throbbed. I was tired, and I was broke, and I was terrified of what the trial would bring. But as I pushed open the heavy doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the blinding sunlight, I felt something I had not felt in 20 years. I felt clean. I had chosen the hard road. I had chosen the ugly road. But it was my road, and for the first time, I wasn't walking it alone. I had Eleanor's ghost beside me, and we were marching straight toward the verdict. The trial began on a Monday morning under a sky the color of a bruised plum. The courtroom was packed. My family occupied the first 2 rows behind the plaintiff's table, a solid wall of crossed arms and disapproving glares. They looked like a choir of moral outrage, waiting to sing the hymn of my destruction. Caleb Morton stood before the jury box, his suit sharp, his demeanor grave. He did not look like a lawyer. He looked like a concerned neighbor leaning over a fence to share a tragic secret. Ladies and gentlemen, Caleb began, his voice low and intimate. This is not a case about money. I know the defense will talk about bank accounts and wills and dollar signs. But this case is about something far more precious. It is about a family. He gestured to Vanessa, who sat with her head bowed, a picture of quiet dignity. Vanessa Nolan came into this family when Aubrey was just a child. Caleb continued, pacing slowly. She stepped into the shoes of a mother who had passed too soon. She gave her heart. She gave her time. She gave her love. And in return? He paused, turning to point a finger at me. In return, she was met with 20 years of resentment, 20 years of hostility from a stepdaughter who viewed her not as a parent, but as an obstacle to an inheritance. I sat stone still, my hands clasped on the table. Jonah had coached me for weeks on this. Do not react, he had said. If you roll your eyes, you are petulant. If you glare, you are aggressive. If you cry, you are unstable. Be a statue. You will hear testimony, Caleb went on, that on the night of November 14th, the defendant, a trained investigator, came to her father's home and brutally attacked the woman who raised her. You will hear how she broke Vanessa's wrist. You will hear how she terrorized a family because she was angry that her grandmother's will might be contested. You will see that the document limiting her father's inheritance was not the wish of a sound mind, but the result of the same bullying tactics she used on her stepmother. It was a compelling story. If I were sitting in the jury box, I might have believed it. Vanessa was the first witness called. She took the stand clutching a tissue, her voice soft and trembling. Can you tell the jury about your relationship with Aubrey? Caleb asked gently. I tried, Vanessa whispered, looking directly at the jury foreman, a middle-aged man who looked sympathetic. I tried so hard. When she was little, I would bake her favorite cookies. I would try to brush her hair, but she would just pull away. She would scream at me. She would say, Vanessa choked back a sob. She would say she wished I would die so her real mom could come back. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I had never said that. I had never even thought that. I had been too busy trying to avoid her pinching fingers to formulate such a complex insult. And as she got older, Caleb prompted. It got worse, Vanessa said, gaining strength. She became physical. She would shove past me in the hallway. She would slam doors on my fingers. I started locking the bathroom door when she was home because I was afraid she would come in while I was showering. I lived in fear in my own house. Did you ever tell anyone? I told my husband, Vanessa said, looking lovingly at Greg. But we wanted to protect her. She has always been troubled. We thought if we just loved her enough, she would change. And the night of November 14th? Vanessa shuddered. She came over late. She was furious. She started screaming about the will. I tried to calm her down. I offered her tea. And then she just snapped. She threw me against the table. She started punching me. I curled up on the floor and begged her to stop, but she just kept hitting me. It was a mirror image. She was describing exactly what she had done to me, but she had flipped the roles. It was the ultimate gaslighting, performed under oath. Jonah leaned over to me. Breathe, he whispered. Let her build the tower. The higher it is, the harder it falls. When it was Jonah's turn to cross-examine, he did not attack her story about the violence yet. He went for the edges. Mrs. Nolan, Jonah said, adjusting his glasses. You stated you locked the bathroom door because you were afraid of Aubrey? Yes, Vanessa said, chin high. Interesting, because looking at the floor plan of the house, the master bath does not have a lock on the door. It is a sliding pocket door with no latch. Is that correct? Vanessa blinked. I meant I wedged it shut. I see, Jonah said. And you said you baked her cookies? Would it surprise you to learn that Aubrey was diagnosed with a severe gluten allergy at age 10? A fact documented in her pediatric records? I made gluten-free ones, Vanessa said quickly. You testified 5 minutes ago that you made her favorite cookies, Jonah pressed. Aubrey's medical file says she never ate cookies because she was terrified of getting sick. But let us move on. He walked to the table and picked up a stack of financial documents. You claim Aubrey attacked you because she was angry about the will. But isn't it true, Mrs. Nolan, that the argument started because Aubrey asked you about a specific check? Check number 402, written to a VM Consulting? I do not recall, Vanessa said icily. You do not recall? Jonah held up the paper. It was for $5,000. That is a lot of money to forget. I manage the household finances, Vanessa snapped. I do not memorize every transaction. No, Jonah agreed. But you do remember Aubrey hitting you? You remember that clearly? Vividly. And yet, Jonah said, you did not call the police immediately. The call log shows a 20-minute gap between when you claimed the assault ended and when the call was placed. What were you doing for 20 minutes? Mrs. Nolan, rehearsing? Objection, Caleb shouted. Sustained, Judge Albright said, though she jotted something down on her notepad. Next came my father. Seeing Greg Nolan take the stand was the hardest part of the day. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had hollowed himself out so completely there was nothing left but a shell. Mr. Nolan, Caleb asked, did you ever see your wife, Vanessa, strike your daughter? Greg looked at his hands. No, never. Never, Greg said softly. And on the night of November 14th, did you see Aubrey attack Vanessa? Greg hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. He looked at me. Sitting at the defense table with my arm in a sling, I saw the struggle in his eyes, the war between his conscience and his comfort. Comfort won. Yes, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Aubrey, she lost control. She shoved Vanessa. It was chaos. Thank you, Mr. Nolan, Caleb said, satisfied. Jonah stood up. He did not approach the witness stand. He stood by me, putting a hand on my shoulder. Mr. Nolan, Jonah called out across the room. You say you never saw Vanessa strike Aubrey, but did you ever see the bruises? Aubrey was a clumsy child, Greg said mechanically. She fell a lot. Did she fall down the stairs when she was 12? Jonah asked. Or did she fall into a door when she was 14? Or did she fall onto a coffee table when she was 16? I do not remember specific incidents, Greg said, sweating. Let us talk about November 14th, Jonah said. You called 911. You told the operator Aubrey lost control. But Mr. Nolan, isn't it true that you sat in your armchair the entire time? You never stood up. You never tried to intervene physically. If your wife was being brutally beaten by a trained investigator, why did you stay seated? I was in shock, Greg claimed. Or, Jonah said, his voice dropping an octave, were you waiting for it to be over so you could clean up the mess, just like you always do? I object to the counsel badgering the witness, Caleb cried. I am finished with this witness, Jonah said with disgust. The parade of relatives followed. Aunt Paula, Cousin Lily, Uncle Darren. They were a chorus of vague condemnation. They spoke of tension. They spoke of Aubrey being cold and distant. She would just sit there at parties, Aunt Paula testified, sniffing. She would glare at Vanessa. You could feel the hate radiating off her. Did you ever ask her why? Jonah asked, on cross-examination. Did you ever ask the 9-year-old girl why she was glaring? Well, no, Paula admitted. It was rude. So you judged a child's silence as hate rather than fear? She wasn't afraid, Paula insisted. She was defiant. By the time the prosecution rested, the jury looked exhausted. They had heard hours of testimony painting me as a monster, but Jonah had planted seeds of doubt. He had shown that their stories were heavy on emotion and light on specifics. Then came the battle over Eleanor. Caleb called a hired expert, a psychiatrist who had never met Grandma, to testify that based on her medical charts, a woman of her age with her condition likely suffered from cognitive decline and susceptibility to undue influence. Jonah countered with Dr. Evans, Eleanor's actual physician, and Mr. Jameson, her lawyer. Mrs. Nolan scored 30 out of 30 on her mini mental state examination 2 days before signing the will, Dr. Evans testified, holding up the chart. She was sharper than I am on most days. Mr. Jameson was even more formidable. I video recorded the signing specifically because I anticipated this family would challenge it, he told the jury. Eleanor Nolan was clear. She was decisive. She told me explicitly that she was cutting her son out because he had failed to protect her assets and her granddaughter. When the defense finally began its case in chief, the air in the room was thick with tension. The jury knew about the recording. It had been mentioned in opening statements, referenced in objections, but they had not heard it. It was the elephant in the room. But first, I had to testify. I walked to the stand, conscious of every eye on me.
I swore to tell the truth. Jonah guided me through my history. I told the jury about the first time Vanessa pinched me. I told them about the vase. I told them about the isolation. I kept my voice steady, factual. I was an investigator giving a report on my own life. Then Caleb rose for cross-examination. He was like a wolf sensing blood. "Ms. Nolan," he said, smiling tightly, "you are a senior investigator, correct? You know the law?"
Yes?
"And you know the procedure for reporting domestic violence?"
Yes.
"So, please tell the jury," Caleb said, leaning on the railing, "in the 20 years you claim this abuse was happening, how many police reports did you file? How many restraining orders did you request?"
None, I said quietly.
"None," Caleb repeated, turning to the jury. "Zero. You claim this woman terrorized you, beat you, threw you downstairs, and yet you never called the cops? You never told a teacher? You never told a doctor?"
I told my father, I said. He told me I was lying.
"But as an adult," Caleb pressed, "you moved out, you had a badge, you had a gun, and still, you say she assaulted you, and you did nothing? Does that sound like the behavior of a victim, or does it sound like someone inventing a history to justify stealing an inheritance?" "It sounds like a daughter who wanted her father to love her," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "It sounds like someone who knew that without proof. No one would believe me against her, just like you are doing right now." "So you admit you have no proof of these past events?" Caleb hammered. "Just your word?"
I have my scars, I said.
"Scars you could have gotten anywhere," Caleb dismissed. "No further questions." I stepped down from the stand feeling shaky. Caleb had done his job. He had used my silence against me. He had made the jury wonder why, if it was so bad. I hadn't fought back sooner. Jonah stood up. He looked at the judge. Then he looked at Vanessa, who was smirking slightly at the plaintiff's table. She thought she had survived. She thought the worst was over. "Your Honor," Jonah said, his voice ringing clear in the silence. "The plaintiff asks why Aubrey Nolan never reported the abuse. He asks why there is no proof. He asks the jury to believe that Vanessa Nolan is a gentle, grieving widow who has been falsely accused." Jonah walked over to the defense table and picked up a laptop. He connected it to the courtroom's audio system. "We submit that the reason there were no police reports is because the Nolan family operated on a code of silence enforced by terror. But on the night of November 14th, that code was broken." Jonah turned to me. "Ms. Nolan, I am showing you Defense Exhibit B. Can you identify this digital file?" "It is the audio recording I made on the night I went to my father's house," I said. "Was this recording made with your consent?" "Yes." "And does it accurately depict the events of that evening?"
Yes.
"Your Honor," Jonah said, looking at Caleb, whose face had gone drain white. "The defense moves to play Exhibit B for the jury. We ask that the jury listen not just to the violence, but to the words. We ask them to compare the voice they are about to hear with the soft-spoken woman who testified this morning, and we ask them to decide who is really telling the truth." Judge Albright nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom went deadly quiet. The only sound was the hum of the hard drive spinning up. I looked at Vanessa. The smirk was gone. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. She looked at Greg, but he was staring at his shoes, a statue of shame. Jonah pressed the space bar. A hiss of static filled the room, and then, my voice, clear and steady. "Let us talk about choices. Vanessa, like the choice you made on November 3rd to transfer $5,000. Then Vanessa's voice, not the soft, weeping voice from the witness stand, but the jagged, hateful rasp of the monster I knew. "I do not know what you are talking about." The jurors leaned forward. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jonah looked at me and gave a barely perceptible nod. The trap was sprung, the lights were on, and for the first time in 20 years, the monster had nowhere to hide. "Ms. Nolan," Jonah said, his voice echoing slightly in the hushed courtroom, "before we play this recording, I need to ask you one final question. You have described a lifetime of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of the plaintiff. You have described a family that systematically ignored your pain. The jury might be wondering, why didn't you go to the police earlier? Why did you wait until you were 35 years old? I looked at the 12 strangers in the jury box. Then I looked at my father. Because I knew I would lose, I said, my voice steady but quiet. I learned when I was 9 years old that the truth does not matter if the person telling the lie is more charming. I knew that if I called the police without irrefutable proof, Vanessa would cry. She would tell a story about how difficult I was. My father would back her up to keep the peace, and the police would look at the crying mother and the angry daughter, and they would choose her. They always chose her. Jonah nodded. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense has established that this recording was made in accordance with state law, with the full consent of one party, my client, and captures the events of the evening in question. Judge Albright looked at the jury. You are instructed that this recording is evidence of the interaction on November 14th. You may proceed. Jonah hit the play button. At first, the sound was low. The courtroom speakers crackled with the ambient noise of my father's living room. Then, Vanessa's voice floated out, smooth and condescending. I am here to offer you a grace period. Aubrey, I am willing to tell the judge that I exaggerated the assault charge. The jurors shifted in their seats. Here was the grieving victim, casually admitting she had lied to the court. Then, my voice, reciting the dates and the dollar amounts of the theft. The tension in the recording ratcheted up, and then, the explosion. You ungrateful, spying little bitch. The scream was so loud, so raw, that 2 jurors actually jumped. It was not the voice of a victim, it was the voice of a predator unmasked. Then came the sounds that made the blood drain from the faces of everyone in the room. The wet thud of a kick landing on flesh, the sharp intake of breath as I curled up, the sound of hair being pulled. Vanessa, stop! Greg's voice on the tape was weak, pathetic. Don't provoke her, Aubrey. Aunt Paula's voice rang out clear as a bell. Just apologize. Look what you are making her do. In the gallery, Aunt Paula put a hand over her mouth, shrinking down in her seat as the entire room turned to look at her. She had testified under oath that she only saw tension. The tape proved she had watched a beating and blamed the victim. But it was what came next that sealed the coffin. On the recording, amidst the sound of my heavy breathing and the rustle of fabric, Vanessa's voice dropped to a terrifying, serpentine hiss. You think anyone will believe you? You are the crazy one. You are the one with the gun and the badge who got suspended. I am the grieving mother. No judge looks at you and sees a victim when I have the bruises. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table, her face a mask of frozen horror. Her skin had turned the color of old ash. She stared at the speaker as if it were a ghost coming to drag her to hell. And then, the final nail. I will tell them you attacked me. I will tell them you broke into the house. I know exactly what to say to the police. I have done it before. Jonah paused the recording. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of an illusion shattering into a million jagged pieces. Jonah turned to the plaintiff's table. He looked directly at my father. Mr. Nolan, Jonah said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. You testified under oath that you never saw your wife strike your daughter. You testified that Aubrey lost control. We just heard you, on tape, watching your wife beat your daughter while she was curled on the floor. We heard you do nothing. Greg stared at the table. He was trembling. A fine sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He could not look at the jury. He could not look at me. He was a man stripped naked in the town square. Jonah turned his gaze to Vanessa. And Mrs. Nolan, Jonah said, you testified that you lived in fear. You testified that you never touched Aubrey. Yet we just heard you boast about how easy it is to frame her. We heard you admit that your bruises are your currency. Caleb Morton stood up, but he looked defeated. Objection, he murmured weakly. Argumentative.
I am not arguing, Jonah said, turning back to the jury. I am letting the truth speak for itself. The rest of the trial was a landslide. When Caleb tried to deliver his closing argument, he looked like a man trying to sell a car that was currently on fire. He mumbled about context and provocation, but his heart wasn't in it. He knew the case was lost. He knew that no amount of legal rhetoric could drown out the sound of Vanessa's voice admitting she knew how to play the victim. Jonah's closing was different. He did not shout. He did not pace. He simply stood in front of the jury and spoke to them like human beings. For 20 years, Jonah said, Aubrey Nolan lived in a prison built of lies. It was not a prison with bars. It was a prison constructed by a family that decided it was easier to blame a child than to confront a monster. They told her that her reality was false. They told her that her pain was inconvenient. They watched her get beaten. And they told her to apologize for bleeding. He pointed to me. This case is not about a will. It is not about money. It is about the moment when the victim finally refuses to be quiet. It is about the moment when the truth is finally louder than the lie. Vanessa Nolan thought she could write the ending of this story. She thought she could use the legal system to finish what she started in that kitchen 2 decades ago, but she forgot one thing. Jonah looked at Vanessa. She forgot that the truth, when it is finally heard, does not need to scream. It just needs to be played. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up. He did not look at Vanessa. He looked at me. In the matter of the estate of Eleanor Nolan, we find the last will and testament to be valid and enforceable. We find no evidence of undue influence. In the matter of the countersuit, the foreman continued, we find for the defendant, Aubrey Nolan, we find the plaintiff, Vanessa Nolan, liable for assault, battery, and civil fraud. We find the third-party defendant, Gregory Nolan, liable for negligence. A gasp went through the courtroom. We award the defendant damages in the amount of $300,000 for medical expenses and pain and suffering, to be paid by Vanessa Nolan. We further award punitive damages in the amount of $500,000. Vanessa let out a strangled cry. She slumped forward, putting her head on the table. Caleb Morton closed his eyes. Furthermore, Judge Albright said, looking over her spectacles, given the evidence presented regarding financial fraud and perjury committed in this courtroom, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for an immediate criminal investigation into the actions of Vanessa Nolan and Gregory Nolan. The gavel banged. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I sat there, stunned. I felt Maya squeeze my good hand. I felt Jonah pat me on the back, but I couldn't move. I was watching my father. He was staring at the judge, his mouth open. The reality was finally crashing down on him. He wasn't just losing the money. He wasn't just losing the house. He was looking at a criminal record. He was looking at the end of his reputation, and he was looking at it alone, because Vanessa was already sobbing into her hands, ignoring him completely. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. The bailiff was moving toward Vanessa. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I walked out of the swinging gate. I made it to the hallway before she caught up to me. Aubrey! I turned. Vanessa was running toward me, Caleb trailing behind her trying to grab her arm. Her face was a mess of running mascara and splotchy red skin. Aubrey, please, she gasped, grabbing my sleeve. I pulled my arm away. Do not touch me. I am sick, Vanessa sobbed. You know I am not well. Aubrey, the stress. I didn't mean those things. I was just angry. You can't let them send me to jail. You can't let them take everything. She looked at me with those wide, wet eyes, the same eyes that had fooled my father, my neighbors, and the police for 20 years. She was trying to play the card one last time. She was trying to find the button that would make me feel guilty, the button that would make me responsible for her mess. We are family, she pleaded. Your father, he is old. Please, Aubrey, we can fix this. We can heal. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had made my childhood a waking nightmare.
I looked for the fear I used to feel. I looked for the anger. There was nothing, just a profound, exhausting pity for a creature who could only survive by feeding on others. "You had 20 years to fix this," I said, my voice calm and final. "You had 1,000 chances to heal. You could have stopped hitting me. You could have stopped stealing from Grandma. You could have told the truth just once." "I am sorry," she wailed, reaching for me again. I took a step back. "The time to be sorry was every single day you chose to hurt me," I said. "You aren't sorry you did it, Vanessa. You are just sorry you got caught." I turned to my father, who was standing a few feet away, looking like a ghost. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to make another excuse, but no sound came out. He just watched me go. I walked out the front doors of the courthouse. The air outside was cool and clean. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the concrete steps. A crowd of reporters was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust in my direction. "Ms. Nolan, how do you feel?" "Ms. Nolan, what will you do with the house? Do you have a comment on the verdict?" I paused on the top step. I looked at the building behind me, the stone edifice where my life had been dissected and stitched back together. I felt the weight of the recorder in my pocket. No longer a secret, but a matter of public record. I looked at the scars on my soul. They were still there. The verdict didn't erase the memories. It didn't unbreak my bones or give me back the childhood I had lost. But it had done something else. It had proven that I existed. It had proven that my reality was true. I touched the verdict form in my hand. "I feel," I said to the wind, more than to the cameras, "like I finally turned on the lights." I walked down the stairs, past the cameras, past the noise. I walked toward my car, where Maya and Jonah were waiting. I didn't walk like a hero who had slain a dragon. Heroes are for fairy tales. I walked like a survivor. I walked like a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side holding her own name. They had taken her side every time she beat me. They had chosen the easy lie over the hard truth. But today, the world had heard the recording, and today, for the first time in my life, the silence belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and resilience. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below and let me know where you are tuning in from and what you would have done in Aubrey's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button to help us share these powerful stories with more people.